Welcome to the Rural Surgeon's Voice with Dr. Jerel Brandt, the podcast where rural medicine meets leadership. This space is dedicated to the challenges of leading and practicing medicine in places where resources are limited, but impact is unlimited. We will explore rural healthcare delivery and the kind of leadership that shapes not just systems, but lives. My name is Dr. Jerel Brandt. I'm a general surgeon with over 10 years of experience practicing surgery at level 2 and critical access hospitals in the rural Midwest. Today, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Lavik. She's a board certified general surgeon who spent over 10 years practicing surgery in rural North Dakota. She has worked at a level 2 trauma center and served at critical access hospitals around the state before opening a surgical center with 3 other surgeons. Dr. Lavik, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
The pleasure's all mine for sure. So I would like to just kind of set some groundwork and let you introduce yourself a little bit, and then maybe talk a little bit about why you chose surgery when you were in medical school.
hmm So I'm Gillian Lavik. I'm a general surgeon. I grew up in a small town, Rugby. It's about an hour east of Minot. We had a very good hospital there growing up, and I think that I did have some exposure to healthcare, whereas people in even smaller towns may not have had that experience. So that was good. The other thing is, in my high school, they actually had a program to train EMT basics. So you could take that as one of your classes in school. So that was a pretty awesome experience to just get exposure to medicine in general, but also kind of the excitement of medicine, getting to meet people who actually work on the ambulance and they tell you their crazy stories. And it made the whole thing very entertaining and fun. And it made it seem like an area that I might want to look into. As far as how I chose surgery once I was in med school, I actually started thinking that I was going to do family practice. Once I actually spent some time job shadowing in family practice, I realized that was not a good fit for me. And I think I recently saw one of those memes that gives you advice when you're choosing a career. Find something that uses the things that you're good at, the things that you enjoy, that it gives you some meaningful purpose in life, and that it provides you a way to make money.
Mhm.
So I think for me, surgery is probably the most perfect fit for all of those things. That I do feel like it's meaningful work, that I do feel like it uses the skills that I'm good at, interacting with people and doing things with my hands and kind of critical thinking on the fly. And at the end of the day, I do enjoy it. I may not enjoy every minute of it, but I generally do really enjoy it.
So, was there a point in your training that you thought, I want to stick with the rural environment? A lot of times people think, oh, I want to move to the big city and live and work in the big city, but you chose to stay in North Dakota. How did you make that decision?
Sure. So I think it was not just a, straight shot to make that decision. I went to college in the Twin Cities, and I think I initially envisioned myself probably staying around there. Ended up coming to North Dakota for med school and being back in North Dakota, especially doing my third year in Bismarck and my fourth year in Minot, just reminded me why North Dakota is a great place to live. I think I still saw myself maybe working at one of the bigger hospitals in the state. And then once I got into practice and kind of realized what I liked doing, rural medicine became more and more of a natural fit.
So, when you were in training, did you train at a large teaching hospital, I assume?
It was a teaching hospital in upstate New York. Their kind of shtick, if you will, is kind of training rural surgeons, which is was a perfect fit for me. It's one of the reasons that I really liked it. I was in Cooperstown, New York, and the program was definitely geared towards helping people train for a practice where they're on their own. We did trauma, we did some specialty surgeries, but I think there was still a lot of focus on how do you take care of patients. It sounds funny, but one of the things that we had a lot of exposure to is plastic surgery.
Hmm.
And I think there's a lot of application of plastics to rural general surgery.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, I really enjoyed being there. And when I was interviewing at different residencies, they were all kind of similar in size and scope. But the one question I asked every place that I went is when I graduate from this program, and am I going to be ready to practice surgery by myself? And different places had different answers, some kind of hemmed and hawed. One place told me, I think you should probably do a fellowship after you finish here.
Hmm.
And when I interviewed in Cooperstown, every attending laughed when I asked them that. They're like, yes, you'll be ready. So I think it ended up being a good fit.
Yeah, for sure. And for people that maybe don't understand the nuances, when you're interviewing residencies, it's kind of a telltale sign that if all of the residents end up in a fellowship, usually that means that they are not prepared to operate on their own. So there are things that you can kind of look for when you're looking at those areas and stuff. So I trained in Michigan at a level two hospital, but there was a level one hospital within 20 minutes. There was world class facilities within 45 minutes of my facility. Did you find that Cooperstown was kind of off on its own, or did they have larger facilities within reasonable distances?
It sounds funny to us in North Dakota because we think of us as being rural and New York as being urban.
Hmm.
But New York is a big state and it's actually very rural in a lot of areas. Cooperstown was very isolated. So there are a lot of things that end up staying there just simply because of geography. Syracuse and Rochester were both over an hour away, and New York City is about 4 hours away. The hospital I trained at, Bassett Hospital, had a loose affiliation with Columbia in the city, which was nice because I feel like it had a lot of focus on education and academia because of that.
Hmm.
But at the same time, you really had that community hospital experience where we saw everything, we did everything, and we took care of most patients there.
Got it. So after a residency, a lot of residents come out being broadly trained and they don't want to necessarily narrow their scope of practice. And I just from our prior conversations, I got the impression that you had decided to work at a level two facility in North Dakota to kind of keep that broad scope. Did you find that there was any differences in the level of patients you kept or the acuity that you had just based on the ruralness of the Cooperstown versus your town here in North Dakota?
hmm I think there were definitely differences. When I first came out of training, I actually thought I'd do a lot more of like advanced laparoscopic surgery.
Mhm,
And when I got to Minot, that actually just wasn't the practice mix that I saw. There was a definite need for breast surgery, and I kind of fell into that role because for a while at least, I was the only female in our practice.
mhm,
And so that became a natural role for me to fill, and I enjoyed it. I really did. Um, as far as keeping patients at the facility, I think that especially when it comes to trauma, in Minot, we have a kind of a unique situation where we're too big to really transfer many patients out, but we're too small to have all of the services of a bigger hospital.
mhm, for
So
sure.
I think as far as gaining confidence and kind of seeing what I was able to do, I think it was really the perfect training ground.
Yeah, for people that don't understand the nuances, the American College of Surgeons has kind of designated requirements for level one, level two, level three trauma facilities. And the difference between level one and level two is pretty significant. And so I think the impression is, oh, that's a level two facility. Probably they don't deal with a lot of trauma, but is what is not realized is that that Minot services the upper northwest corner of the state, so kind of a quarter of the entire state, and so they do become a funnel for a lot of trauma.
Hmm.
And when I first started here, and you too, there was not a level one trauma center in the state.
Right.
There is now, which is awesome, but by ground, that's 4 hours.
Hmm.
And so I think that also changes a lot. In my training, we thought, oh, well, we'll just send them 45 minutes down the road, not a big deal. And now it's like, well, you send them 4 hours down the road. And that not only changes your ability to transfer, but sometimes the mode of transfer and I mean, all sorts of nuances. Have you experienced situations where you felt like you had to maybe work at the top of your scope, or maybe even in situations where you're not really comfortable just because you were not able to transfer a patient for any number of reasons?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say it more had to do with the acuity of the issues the patients had than not being able to transfer, for another reason. But I still remember doing trauma and doing a pancreatic resection. I had hoped to never do a pancreatic resection when I was out in practice, but life sometimes throws you a curveball, and luckily I had the training to know how to do that.
Hmm. For sure. I, I don't remember the details, but I had a pediatric patient that came in after being in an accident and had a brain bleed, and the neurosurgeon said, well, we need to decompress. We need to do a craniotomy, but there was a storm coming in. And so we
Mhm.
had a window of like 2 hours to transfer, and we knew that the surgery is going to take longer than that. But we can't keep a pediatric patient intubated at our hospital.
Right.
And so it was a really big issue because he was on the phone with the neurosurgeon at the receiving facility, and he's like, if I don't operate, they might die en route. If I do operate, I don't know how to take care of them afterwards. And he ended up having to operate, and we managed through. But those are the types of situations I think that a lot of people don't think about when they're thinking about rural surgery. And it was a surprise to me when
Right.
I moved back to Minot to work in North Dakota.
The first time that I went back and visited friends in Cooperstown, we were just talking about practice and what it's like, and I was telling them some of the stories of things I've seen. Everybody was just jaws dropped, you know. Nobody was really expecting that I'd run into things like that in North Dakota, thinking it's kind of some sleepy little community where nothing bad ever happens. So, yeah, it's definitely a wake up call to me, but also like I said before, it's good training, and I don't regret that experience at all. So,
That's great. And it's funny because working at the level 2 facility here in Minot, I did not understand then what the real critical access hospitals are dealing with
mhm,
throughout the state. And so I think there's this common thing where there's a patient at a critical access hospital, they need to transfer them up. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're on the other end of the phone thinking, why on earth is this patient being transferred here? Were you surprised at some of those differences, or is that something you experienced when you were working here in Minot before you started your outreach stuff?
so I would say that when I was in training, we had the opportunity to work in some smaller hospitals, more as like an elective rotation. But
Mhm,
I did outreach days with some of my attendings where we go and do small surgeries, colonoscopies, some clinic, that kind of thing. So I had some idea before. And then when I came here, I started going to Rolla right away and got some experience there. And I'd spent time in the Rugby hospital when I was younger as well.
mhm.
And then I also started going out to Williston to the Trinity facility there. So I had some idea too. I think that I was pretty aware of that already. Depending on what it was, sometimes I felt frustrated too, but for the most part, I did know their access to specialty care, support, all those things are just so different than they are in a bigger hospital.
Yeah, one of the things I didn't realize until I started going to the critical access hospitals routinely is, the ER at the critical access hospital is not necessarily manned overnight.
Hmm.
The staff has to come in when there's a patient coming to the ER.
Right.
And if it's any sort of patient that might need a surgical service, this entire hospital might be manned by nurse practitioners and physician assistants. Like they may not have an MD on staff even.
Hmm.
And so things that I had not even considered when I was working at the level 2 facility in the state. So it's been kind of eye opening to see the things that they're having to deal with
Hmm.
and how well they deal with them, which is a credit to them for sure. How do you think all of that affects the patients in these rural communities? I mean, is there value in having, somebody like one of us go out to their facility and provide the surgical services that might be somewhat limited compared to what they'd get at a level 2 facility? Or is it not a big deal for having them driving into Minot to be seen?
Hmm. I think the important thing is knowing what they can do and do well, and also having a backup plan if there's something that they can't handle there. I think that providing services to patients that live there so they don't have to travel for basic needs like colonoscopies, small surgeries, that kind of thing, I think that's an excellent service to be able to provide. I think that their ERs need to feel comfortable reaching out to larger hospitals to see if they can accept a patient when there's something more urgent going on. A lot of those operating rooms can't be staffed 24 hours a day because it's the same staff all the time. They can't be on call every minute of every day of their lives. Some of them don't even live in town, especially people that farm. They might be traveling from an hour away to go work their shift in the OR, and they may not be able to be available in the middle of the night. So those hospitals have to be able to have a backup plan for things that come in unexpectedly.
Absolutely. And some of the research I've done, it seems like it takes about a population of around 12,000 to support a full-time general surgeon. And so just from a financial aspect, a lot of these critical access hospitals wouldn't have the volume
Mhm.
to necessitate a full-time general surgeon. But I'm also surprised how many people, when I go to the critical access hospitals, they're still driving an hour or more sometimes to be seen at that critical access hospital
Right.
as opposed to going to the level two hospital. So it's just amazing that people are having to drive so much, I guess, to get to the care that they need.
Mhm.
As you transitioned out of working at the level two institution, did you notice a difference in your approach to working at the critical access? Because you worked at some critical access places, you did outreach
Mhm.
through the level two facility, and then afterwards you continued working at the various critical access hospitals. Did you notice a difference in your approach at all when you were working there?
Yeah, I definitely did. I think that when I first was doing outreach when I was employed at the bigger hospital and it was just a part of my normal work life, I if something came up, I always felt like I could handle that on my own. Somebody that needed something done that couldn't be done at the critical access hospital, I'd say, "Okay, I'll get you scheduled with me back in Minot when we can get it figured out."
Mhm.
And now I kind of have to depend on other people in the area because I can't do everything. Not only where I'm at the critical access hospital there, but the other ones that I service and also back in Minot. I just don't have access to the same facilities that I used to. So there's more communication between different specialties. I find that I reach out to people both in Bismarck and Minot a little bit more to let them know what's going on and to help them get the care that they need.
Mhm. Well, that's great. One of the things that I guess I've found interesting is when I did limited outreach, when I worked at the level two institution, it was kind of like, oh, there's this day I need to go and I'm going to spend a couple hours driving or flying there and I'll, see a handful of patients. And there's so much work to be done at this institution. And it was sometimes challenging and difficult to take the time to do the outreach and provide those services. And then on the flip side, when you have administration talking to you about productivity and RVUs, it feels very different, or it felt very different. And now when I go out there as a contract surgeon, I enjoy it. I love interacting with the staff out there. They're fantastic. They all do a great job
Mhm.
and I feel a lot more invested and maybe that's just my different perspective now,
Right.
but I do think that definitely becomes difficult because on one hand I think the level 2s should be supporting the critical access hospitals, but on the flip side it makes it difficult for the individual providers to want to take that time to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, it takes support from administration. It takes buy-in from the hospital and your partners and everybody. I think that was one of the things that uh, made it easier for me to transition out of being employed by a single hospital was that sometimes I couldn't have the flexibility in that schedule that allowed me to service some of the smaller communities.
hmm So talk to me a little bit about that. So you worked at the hospital for like 8 years
Yep,
or so?
about 8 years. Yep.
Okay. And then you eventually ended up transitioning with three other surgeons and you all opened a surgery center. Was there as one specific event or I mean it sounds like this might maybe was more like a feeling that was growing over the course of that time?
Yeah, I would say that the four of us all had different reasons for wanting to do it. For me personally, it was being able to have that flexibility to make my own schedule to say, I want to help out rugby this day because they were at a point where their general surgeon wants to start taking some time away. He's getting a little bit older, close to retirement, and doesn't want to be there all the time. They're also getting a little bit busier, so they need a little bit extra help. And then also being able to service some of the other communities, Botno, Rolla, Harvey, places that really could use some help. And then I saw the opportunity to open a surgery center really gave me a home base that I could look to
hmm
while still being able to service these other communities.
Yeah. So I mean that just it seems like a very reasonable process. And yet I also feel like opening a surgery center is just a monumental task and terrifying. How did you how did you and your partners start to work through that process?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of my partners is the ultimate cheerleader, and from the very beginning, he just said that we're gonna do it. We're gonna do it, and he said it's gonna work because we're gonna make it work, you know?
Mhm.
And I think one of the mantras I kept telling myself, don't how it to death, wow it to life.
Hmm. I
So
like that.
I ended up talking to our financial advisor who worked with only physicians, or that's kind of their company's model. And so I told him what I was thinking about doing, and he said, "Well, I don't know if you knew this, but you're not financially ready for that." I said, "I know." And so he put me in touch with some people that could help, and that was the development group that we actually ended up working with. They helped us with some, um, uh, financial support from other equity partners, and also helped us find the people that could help us with the building, also setting up the business, figuring out our billing services, all the things that we don't think about or that we're not trained to do as physicians.
Oh, that's fantastic. You gotta have the right people on your
I
team.
know, yeah.
That makes all the difference. So, when you were at the level two facility in Minot here, you served several leadership positions. But as we've talked in the past, your real passion is just patient care.
Yeah.
I mean, heads down, taking care of patients. You do well in the leadership positions, but this probably forced you to transition into a bit of a leadership position that maybe is not your passion. How did you work through that? And what kind of obstacles have come up that you didn't anticipate?
hmm So I think there's been a lot of challenges that I really never saw myself taking on. If you would have asked me 10 years ago, I would have never thought that I'd be starting a private practice or being in any sort of administrative role, whether it be in a hospital setting or a private practice. But I think it was when the time came, it was a welcome change. I think I was ready for those new challenges. I think that we're lucky too to have a group where I don't have to be the sole leader, that we kind of share leadership between the four of us,
Hmm.
as well as our development team and our managers. I think that they really all play a very important role. I think that we had been talking before the podcast started. I think that one of the roles I see myself in is maybe somebody who sets the culture. And I think that setting a culture where people feel comfortable speaking their mind, if they have an idea and they want to bring it up, that it'll be considered and taken seriously, and that everybody has an equal say to bring what they think needs to be done to the table, and then we can look at the ideas and decide what will work best for the organization.
Yeah, one of the things I always appreciated about you when we worked together in Minot was you had a way of setting a very personable culture. You carried the respect of a physician and a surgeon with the staff, and yet you were always very approachable. And I think that set everybody at ease around you. And then you were very good at doing the things that me personally, I don't think about.
Mhm.
You remembered people's birthdays, or you'd bring in baked goods for special occasions, things that are just completely over my head.
Mhm.
And those types of things go a long way, I think, with the staff and making people feel like they're valued in the workplace.
Mhm. And that's the culture that we really wanted to, model at the surgery center, and that's what we've just tried to do from day one, is not only staff, not only patients, but everybody to feel like it's a warm, welcoming place where they can come and get taken care of.
From what I can see, everyone seems very happy every time I've been there. It is a bit of a breath of fresh air, for sure. Um, Looking back over the process of starting this new venture, is there anything in particular you say, man, I wish I would have done that differently?
Um, I can't really say that because I think it's been such a whirlwind, and every step I've just kind of had to survive for a little while.
Hmm.
So I think that if there's one thing I'd change is that I kept waiting to feel ready for everything. And I think that if I could change one thing, it would just say, or I would just tell myself that I'm never going to feel ready. I have to just decide to be ready.
Hmm.
And if I look at it from that perspective, I think that the changes that we've had to make along the way, those are things that we couldn't anticipate, that we couldn't necessarily be ready for, but we've had to adapt and overcome and just change things on the fly as we needed to. But no, I've been very happy with my decision. Um, there have been challenges along the way, but for the most part, I think it was the right decision for me and the right decision for my family and my partners and all the people I work with. So that's really good. And I like you said, get great positive feedback from patients. So
Hmm.
it makes it all worth it in the end. So
Yeah, I think the community's been very happy and we've been well received with that. And I hadn't thought about it, but I think you're right. You know, as surgeons, we're trained to have a plan A, plan B, C, D. I mean, before you step in the operating room, you better have all of the plans
hmm
figured out. You definitely don't want to be figuring that out on the fly. And so that's how we're trained. That's what we're used to doing. But in business, sometimes things move so fast, you don't have time to come up with A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and you can't fall into the um, you know paralysis by analysis type
right.
situation.
Yep.
You just have to make a decision quickly and move and adjust and pivot and then keep going forward.
hmm
So I want to. You had mentioned a little bit earlier when we were talking about when you're working at these critical access hospitals and when you were at the level 2 hospital, you could always just bring them back to the mothership, so to speak, and
Yep.
you have all the resources at your fingertips. And now you're having to collaborate a lot more with other surgeons and physicians around the state. Have you found that you've had to limit your practice in some ways when you're working in the critical access facilities? And if so, why?
Absolutely. I've definitely noticed there's a change in my practice mix. I used to do a lot of breast cancer surgery. Now that's something I pretty much never do any of.
Hmm.
There have been rare exceptions to that, but I don't have all of the kind of ancillary services that are available at a level 2 hospital. So I've had to refer those patients on. I think that I can still keep it part of my practice for people that want advice, or especially people who live in a small town and don't understand why they might have to travel to Bismarck or Minot or Grand Forks to have their surgery. I think the experience that I have helps to guide them and helps them understand what's going on.
Hmm.
So I think that I still provide some of those services in a way, but my practice mix has definitely changed. Even things like gallbladder surgery, we consider it to be kind of one of our bread and butter cases,
Yes.
but I'm pretty selective about who I will do, not only in the small hospitals, but also at the surgery center, because the last thing I want to do is get into a situation where I wish I had more services available.
Hmm. Yeah, one of the things that I don't think I again ever really appreciated it until I started working more consistently at some of the critical access hospitals is they might say they have an ICU, but really that means they have a room that they call the ICU,
Right.
and there's nobody there that can necessarily run the ventilator if a patient has to stay intubated.
Mhm.
And so you don't have a MDA, you have a CRNA, which is they always do a great job, but you have to work a lot more closely,
Mhm.
I think, with our anesthesia teams at those critical access hospitals because they have a lot of concerns that I typically didn't think about when I was at the level 2 facility and they
Right.
had MDAs and critical care docs and all the people to help out when needed.
Yeah. The surgeons definitely have to be a lot more involved in patient selection, as well as talking about potential medical issues and post-op care in ways that we didn't have to at a bigger facility.
Agreed. And one of the things that you and I have briefly kind of communicated about is this new recommendation that came out by SAGES, the Society of American Gastroenterology Surgeons, about doing intraoperative cholangiograms when we do laparoscopic cholecystectomies. And I've kind of read through some of their material and I read through the brief statement that the American College of Surgeons put out regarding that.
hmm
And I just found it interesting. Before I give you my take, what was your first thought and maybe still your thoughts on those position statements?
Sure. So I think that the first thing I thought about is how am I going to do that in Harvey? you
Right.
know.
Absolutely.
So, and again, I wouldn't do every gallbladder in Harvey that I was able to do in Minot.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I think that if the opportunity arose where I should say the situation arose where I needed to do an intraoperative cholangiogram, I have another plan B in my back pocket. I think it would be very rare for me to even consider doing it at a rural facility.
Hmm.
I know in rugby they do have the equipment, but it's equipment that I haven't actually used for that purpose. Not that I couldn't figure it out on the fly, but again, the comfort level of having to do it unexpectedly just isn't there in some of those small facilities, let alone knowing if their equipment is going to be expired, if their, choledochotomy tube is, if that's going to be still available to be used, or if the rubber is going to be cracking, or all
Right.
those things. So, having a recommendation that we should do one thing every single time can be challenging.
Hmm.
And I think that that's pretty much across the board. Um, but especially in rural hospitals, I think making a whole nother procedure a necessary or required part of a surgery makes it harder for them to provide those services anymore.
Absolutely. My knee jerk reaction was just one of frustration.
Right.
I personally, I did not do a lot of intraoperative cholangiograms and training. I've done a few since I've gotten out.
Mhm.
So right off the bat, I don't feel super comfortable. And admittedly, that's a skill I should learn and hone in a little bit more. And then I thought, well, how, I don't even know if some of these hospitals have C arms that I can take in the operating room to
Right.
do that. And they are already pressed for finances and they're going to have to go buy cholangiogram equipment now. And like, I don't even know if this is feasible.
Mhm.
And so that was my just first knee jerk reaction. And as I read through the position statement from Sages, um, I guess putting on my administration hat, I kind of feel like from their standpoint, they're saying, hey, listen, this is a skill that we shouldn't lose because I think it's a lot of us have become complacent with it, myself included.
Mhm.
Number two, we should do more of them to make sure our residents coming out are competent in those areas. And then a lot of the position statement was actually comparing the intraoperative cholangiogram versus the intraoperative ultrasound and the use of ICG.
Right.
And coming from doing robotic surgery, which I did a lot of when I was at the institution here in Minot, loved it. I loved using the ICG for gallbladders, but I am in full agreement with Sages that you can't really identify common duct stones. That's not even really the purpose of
The
the
point of it,
ICG.
yeah.
And so as I read through the paper, I'm like, okay, I get where they're coming from. I don't think their recommendations are unreasonable. And they even said at the end of the paper, if someone has normal labs, normal ultrasound looking at the common bile duct, and there's no reason to think there's common duct stones, then you wouldn't necessarily have to do it. So I do appreciate that they gave us a little bit of a way out, maybe.
Yeah. Little wiggle room there.
Yeah, so that was nice. And it's easy to lose sight of the fact that these organizing bodies usually do have some really good rural surgery representation.
Right.
So I do appreciate their voice in those meetings because, yeah, sometimes it feels difficult when you're reading these recommendations coming down and thinking like, I don't know if I can do that
Right.
in the facilities I'm working. Have you noticed any other just areas of disparity when you're going out to these critical access hospitals, whether it's in the realm of surgery or if it's just in patients in general?
Mhm. So one thing that I've really noticed is an issue with transportation,
Hmm.
especially getting people to their appointments, getting people to their colonoscopies, all those things. Transportation in rural areas can be a real challenge. I know that Rugby has looked at all kinds of different ways to get patients there, to get in for their testing and get in for their appointments. Different things have worked for a while and then failed. Other things haven't worked. Sometimes it's difficult to get in touch with people to make sure they get where they need to be at the right time.
Yep.
So, all those things can be a challenge for sure. Had a chance to speak with one of the researchers at UND. This was a couple of years ago now, but they were looking at colon cancer in some of our rural counties in North Dakota, and patients diagnosed with colon cancer in some of the rural counties had a lower chance of survival. Probably just correlates with them being diagnosed at a later stage, maybe not getting screened as early or as often, having some challenges getting to where they need to be, or provider access, all those kind of things. And I think that getting surgeons out in those rural communities is probably the best way to deal with it, because it might be hard for somebody get from, you know, Towner, let's say, to Rugby, but it's more challenging to get that person from Towner to Minot.
Hmm. Absolutely. And just as you're talking, I'm thinking about some of the things I hadn't even considered. Just the fact that North Dakota is a chilly state, and
Mhm.
we always joke that there's you know, 2, 3, 4 months of summertime. But we have an enormous amount of seasonal workers,
Mhm.
whether it's construction, some oil is seasonal, but a lot of farming.
Mhm.
And it wasn't that long ago when I had a patient in that needed a surgery, and he's like, well, okay, we got to do it before calving season starts.
Right?
And so we did the surgery, and I'm like, okay, I'd love to see you back in 2 weeks when I'm back in town. And he's like, if calving season starts early, I might not be able to make it, but if it starts late, I can. And so we ended up compromising. I was like, listen, if you're doing great in 2 weeks and it's calving season, then no news is good news. Just don't show up and reschedule for 4 weeks down the road. But on the flip side, if you can make it, that'd be great too.
Sure.
I assume if there's a problem, you'll at least call. And so I think he didn't show up, and he
Mhm.
rescheduled, and I saw him then 4 weeks down the road. But the farmers, they're very much on a timeline, whether it's getting their crop in or getting their crop out, and calving is a big deal for them. So it is a challenge to sometimes work around all those things.
Right? And people, especially for colonoscopies, that's what comes up the most is people don't want to do their prep in a hotel room if they can avoid it. They want
Hmm.
to be at home. They want to have a close, easy place to go where they know the person that they're checking in with. And it's just a few steps down the hall rather than going through a big facility where they don't know all the people. They don't know where to go, where to check in, who to ask if they have a question or if they need to go to the bathroom or if they need to, find a gown or those kind of things. So I think being able to keep those patients close to home in smaller facilities where there's a familiar face, I think there's a huge benefit to that.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of value, and I've ran into a lot of patients too that just can't financially, right? Like you were
Mhm.
talking, they can't get transportation. I just was thinking about a patient that I had when I was here in Minot, and I wanted to transfer him to a hernia specialist. Well,
Right,
it's again, that's 4 hours away. And he's like, I'm a single parent. Who's going to take care of my kids? How am I going to get down there for the pre-op and then surgery and then spend the night in the hospital? And he's like, that's just not feasible.
hmm,
So you're absolutely right. And then on the flip side, I had a patient recently that works out in the oil patch, and he's like, "Can I do my prep? Can I work and do my prep at the same time?" I'm like, "Do you have access to a bathroom?" And he's like, "Well, there's a porta potty on site."
right,
I'm like, I mean, if you want to prep with a porta potty," he's like, "Okay."
yeah,
So it's amazing some of the people, some of the things that these people are going through.
right,
And it's easy to forget the kind of if I don't work, I don't eat mentality that some of them
right,
are dealing with in these areas. I guess I just didn't run into that a lot in residency.
hmm,
Um, so being faced with it now is definitely makes it interesting to work through those.
right.
Is there anything else that you would like to add to anything we've talked about so far?
No, I think we've covered a lot of topics. I think, this has all been a really interesting, challenging, fun, joyful, hard journey,
Hmm.
all the emotions. And I think I've learned a lot. Hope that we have been able to provide something not only to the Minot community, but also to some of the surrounding communities and really just enriching the lives of the patients that we see there.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for being with me, Dr. Lavik, and I've appreciated having the opportunity to spend some time at your surgery center, Dakota Medical Surgery Center. So I'm hoping that you guys will continue to be busy and successful, and I have no doubt that you will. I think that you definitely are serving um, a, a much needed niche in our community. And so I think there'll be nothing but positive growth for that. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. And I hope to be able to maybe have some of your partners on at some point too.
Yeah, I'm sure they'd be happy to be here.
Great. Thank you so
All
much.
right. Thank you.